Hey, What Next listener. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little bit later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Ever since President Biden dropped out of the race, there's been a particular attack lobbed at Vice President Kamala Harris, coming from the right.
They're in a box. They are in a box where they've got to choose between a mentally incompetent president and a DEI vice president.
It's Republican lawmakers. It's conservative commentators on TV.
I think she was a DEI hire, and I think that's what we're
It's spoken like a refrain.
100%. She was a DEI hire.
You hear it over and over again.
Yeah, and then there's the DEI press secretary telling you that the DEI vice president is
her whole history is DEI, diversity.
The only reason Kamala's in the White House is because of the DEI deal Biden cut with Bernie.
She's a DEI hire, right? She's a woman.
They chose her because of DEI, and they're stuck with her.
It's not a secret what any of this is supposed to mean. For a code word, this one is pretty thinly veiled.
We are starting to see the conservative arm of this race be incredibly racist and sexist towards her. That is the terminology that the GOP is choosing to go back to in this moment and doing their very best to make it stick as a derisive term, which is to say this language of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Dr. Brittney Cooper is a professor of gender studies and Africana studies at Rutgers University. She's not exactly surprised by the meltdown in response to Harris's ascent.
The scripts around how our country deals with its racism, its sexism, and its anxiety about women in leadership, none of that is new. And so part of what the GOP has done is to try to normalize taking us back to the past and taking us back to a very old playbook in response to diversity, in response to expanding democracy, in response to the possibility of a more multiracial, multi-gender democracy. They are bringing back a very old set of tropes, stereotypes, and frankly, just racist, sexist, and offensive ideas about who Black women are, who Black people are, who women are.
Kamala Harris is the first Black woman and the first Indian woman to be a major party's presumptive nominee. Her campaign also came together in under 5 days. So this is all happening on an accelerated timeline. And while it's an undeniable opportunity, this is not a small task to ask a candidate to take over and revive a flailing campaign with just over 3 months to go.
I do think that folks like to think about, sort of stereotypes of magical Negroes or magical Black people, right, as saving the world. And I do think that she is under pressure. And while I will admit that I am very excited by it, it is nice to feel hopeful, even if for a brief moment in politics. History teaches me that we have to be skeptical because this is a classic glass cliff assignment. By which I mean, this is the language that gets used for women, particularly in corporate America, where a corporation is literally on its last legs. It is in an extreme level of crisis. And so at that moment, then a company will say, we're going to now take a risk. And the risk is to diversify and to give a woman a shot at leadership and basically to give her an impossible task and ask her not merely to crack the glass ceiling, but not to go over the glass cliff. And given that, it is just It is actually, frankly, appalling to me that it is at that moment that folks would say, you know what we will do? We'll give a Black girl a shot.
Today on the show, Kamala Harris's opponents are using an ugly playbook to slow her momentum. Will it work? I'm Mary C. Curtis, in for Mary Harris. This is What Next. Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies, all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Here's our expert, the technology futurist, Ian Kahn.
Hi, I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, as our company expands, so do our hiring efforts. How can AI help us attract top talent? Signed, Searching for Higher Power.
So, searching for higher power, one of the most daunting undertakings of an HR leader today is building a new team and finding and vetting new talent. This is a very time-consuming process and can take precious organizational resources. As a companion to the HR team, AI technology can be used to create job descriptions, analyze candidate resumes, and filter candidates into various pools based on experience, skills, or any other parameter. You can also use AI to match internal talent with positions available. Parameters for this can be set, rules can be set, that can all be done through the algorithm. There are so many things that we as humans could be not looking at that AI can do in a matter of seconds.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
I want to back up a bit and dig into some of the terms we've been talking about. Exactly what is the phrase DEI doing? Where does it come from? And how is it being used?
DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It really comes out of this sort of broader push really that happens academically about 30 years ago, where we begin to talk about race and gender and sexuality and all of these identity categories as a way to address historical inequities against women and Black people and more broadly, people of color. In the early 2000s, you began to see companies and universities hiring chief diversity officers whose job it was to think about inequity in hiring, to think about challenges of both recruitment and retention in the workplace. This acronym of DEI, those terms are meant to signal an intentional attempt by corporations, by universities, by government to actually broaden the hiring pool and then to make sure that people do not work in hostile environments. And apparently, those are odious terms for those on the right.
I remember back in January when those doors were falling off of Boeing airplanes and people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. started saying things along the lines of, well, Boeing is focusing on DEI efforts, and now the planes are falling apart. When did you notice this term being used for a broader audience to target Black people?
It really begins around that time. So there's an early moment, and I'm not exactly sure of the exact date. But what happens is that someone takes the term DEI and they start to say, oh, this means they didn't earn it. And we should call them the didn't earn it's, right? And so it has been co-opted and rebranded on the right as this notion that basically Black people in particular, Black women among them, are getting jobs that we aren't qualified for and we didn't earn, and more crucially, that we are taking away from qualified white men. That is really the argument that white men have been making around affirmative action and now what they're calling their version of DEI, which is didn't earn it. And by that, they mean that the folks that they're hiring are only there because of their skin color or their gender and not able to actually be good engineers of the planes. It's completely preposterous. But it plays on this fear and this anxiety, particularly this anxiety around of working class white men about being pushed out of the economy and pushed out of good jobs and having to compete with a more diverse applicant pool.
The question of earning it, Bret Stephens wrote a column for the New York Times about Harris that did a number of things. And one of them was he pointed to Kamala Harris apparently failing the bar exam the first time back in 1990 as a reason why she shouldn't have been qualified to become DA and then Attorney General in California. And as you say, he suggests that merit became secondary to race and that swing state voters are going to be asking themselves these types of questions in November. What do you think about that?
What are we even talking about? It doesn't matter if she failed the bar. It only matters that she passed the bar, that she was certified, that she has won multiple statewide and national elections. But the thing about this is the folks writing this stuff, they know this. They just need it to be true, even though it is patently untrue, that Black people rise to the highest levels of government and corporations because we're unqualified, when the opposite is actually true, which is that we have to be more qualified than anybody, given the levels of hurdles that we have to overcome in order to have a fighting shot at these jobs. And what is also true is that part of what it has meant to be a white man in America is that the bar is continuously lowered so that white men can crawl over the bar. And exhibit A in that conversation is Donald Trump, a failed businessman, an actual criminal, a person who does not seem to be able to put together coherent sentences well on a regular basis. And yet somehow people look at this man and say, you know what would be a good idea? For us to let him be the leader of the free world.
Harris is not just dealing with racist attacks. She's also a woman, and we've seen the sexism on full display. Now, Barack Obama was a Black man, got attacked, and Hillary Clinton, as a woman, got attacked. Do these attacks against Harris differ from those a Black man or white woman would get? How so?
Absolutely. So when Black women rise to these positions, we have to deal with the problem of white supremacy. We have to deal with the problem of patriarchy and sexism. And so she's got a fine needle to thread around being hypersexualized. Like, for instance, one thing that's really important to say about Kamala Harris that I've noticed, she is what we would say in America as conventionally attractive. You know, she's light skinned, she has long hair, she's of a fairly, thin build. And so I noticed that she has not played that up. She's always in a pantsuit. You rarely see her come out in something, stunning and beautiful in terms of fashion. You think about her next to someone like Michelle Obama, who in Barack Obama's second term really plays up this notion of fashion. Kamala Harris, there's the risk of her not being taken seriously as a leader, as a thinker, because she is considered a conventionally attractive woman. And that is just kind of classic sexism.
Harris isn't just dealing with the DEI label. Far-right blogger Matt Walsh and former Fox host Megyn Kelly have suggested Harris slept her way to the top. Conspiracy theorist Laura Loomer went even further, alleging that the Veep was, quote, once an escort, unquote. And in a video from 2021, now vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance called Harris a, quote, childless cat lady, unquote, even though she has 2 stepchildren. But Brittney says these attacks can backfire, in part by revving up the base.
I'm reminded that when the famous anti-lynching activist Ida B. Wells came out strong against the problem of lynching in Tennessee, and white men wrote articles in the paper about how she lacked virtue and how she basically was sexually immoral, that made tens of thousands of Black women across the country angry. And so they founded the biggest organization of Black women ever in history at that time, the National Association of Colored Women, largely to take care of Ida B. Wells. And so when I see these Black women coming together in organizations like Win with Black Women, and their call of 44,000 Black women on Sunday night, the very same night that this new move in the Democratic Party was announced, I was like, oh, this is part of an old strategy. This is actually a long history of Black women knowing how to squat up and get together and say, there's strength in numbers. We have each other's backs.
After the break, what is Kamala Harris going to have to do to actually win in November?
This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI will not help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, or identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, or automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
Let's talk about strategy through November. At a primary debate in March 2020, Joe Biden promised to name a woman as his running mate if he won the nomination. Then after he won, his campaign floated several prominent Black politicians and officials as possible names, before eventually landing on Kamala Harris. Now that Harris is the presumptive nominee and she's being smeared as a DEI hire, do you think Biden in some way set Harris up for these attacks? Would it have been better to just say, I'm going to pick the best person and then just pick Harris?
You know, I don't think so. I don't play those games that we play around, this sort of notion that we need to have colorblind, gender-blind liberalism. The logic of affirmative action said that our country had, as a matter of policy for more time than it has not, discriminated against women explicitly, discriminated against Black people, Mexican people, Asian people explicitly, and that in order to remedy that, we needed to be explicit about what categories we were addressing, because these were categories that had been historically discriminated against. I think that Joe Biden suggested that he was going to pick a woman, said it explicitly, because it was a way to be held accountable. And it was also a way to acknowledge that the power base of the Democratic Party is Black women, and that has been true for the whole of the 21st century, and that it was time to actually make some concessions to this group. And so the challenge of playing merit games is that we're always having it's not a good faith conversation when we say just pick the best person. Who's to say that Kamala Harris isn't the best person? She's certainly among the best. So we're not having a merit conversation in politics. Politics is not about merit. George W. Bush, a C student at Yale, didn't become the president over Al Gore because of merit.
Well, let's say for the sake of argument that there does exist an element out there in the electorate. They're white. They have negative thoughts about diversity efforts and affirmative action. Is there any reason to believe Biden naming the gender or race of his running mate before actually picking Kamala Harris might hurt her chances?
I think that the folks who have a problem with gender and race were going to have a problem with it, whether it was named explicitly or it wasn't named explicitly. These are not folks who want diversity efforts. And one of the challenges that we have in our politics is that we continue to appeal to that group of folks. And one of the things that I think this moment shows us, particularly with the excitement around Kamala, which I was actually very surprised by, is that folks want newness. They want new opportunities. They want candidates that reflect the diversity of the country. They want candidates that have a particular set of commitments. And so I don't think that in terms of what Kamala needs to think about and do to win, that spending her time trying to justify her existence and prove herself to people who are committed to underestimating and misunderstanding her is a proper use of her time.
There's some contradictions out there. We know that there are counties there where white voters voted for Obama, then voted for Trump. He won Iowa, Ohio. How do you engage with this type of electorate and get them to vote for Harris? Because she wants to win.
That's right. Look, you're absolutely right that there is there's real complexity there, which is to say that I think that there are significant swaths of white voters in the country who like to see themselves as progressive, who like to, sort of tell themselves like, I could vote for a Black person. I don't see race. I don't see color. I just, vote for the person that I like the best. While not actually doing the deeper work to think about what it means to actually be led by Black people when you don't have a deep cultural understanding of who Black people are. And I fundamentally think that that's what happened with Barack Obama. The thing that I would say to those voters, and the thing that I think that Kamala Harris has to say to those voters, is like, this isn't about the identity of a candidate. It is about whether or not the government, the democracy is going to work for you and is going to make your life better, or whether it isn't. There's real bread and butter issues around policy that are not about the identity politics of it all. And at the end, the other major issue here that we have seen, regardless of whether we're talking about red states or blue states, is that women are like, abortion is healthcare. We want to be able to build families in the ways we want to be able to do that. And I do think that that is huge. I do think it has been a winning issue for Democrats, even in locales where folks are largely conservative. I think Kamala has actually been excellent on the point. And I think that there's a lot of ground that she can make up there. And it's just very simple, which is like, so I thought that the press release saying Happy World IVF Day to everybody but JD Vance was really smart marketing strategy,
All eyes are on Harris's future VP pick. She says she's aiming to have a decision by August 7th. And according to the Washington Post, there's a top 3. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, and Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, all from swing states, all men, all white.
Look, there's the strategy and the gamesmanship of politics. Barack Obama had to do it. Let's not forget that one of the famous gaffes that Joe Biden made was when he called Barack Obama clean and articulate. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
That's right. And so Black people were like, not you calling this Black man, Harvard graduate, articulate, right? And so it stoked this old, longstanding, racial microaggression thing that Black people in professional spaces often deal with, where, our white colleagues are shocked that we actually speak well. And yet, that's the person that he picked for vice president. Yes, he picked him because he had incredible foreign policy experience, but also it assuaged particular voters that he was going to have an experienced number 2 who had a long history in politics. And then certainly Joe Biden's identity, helped as, a working class guy from Scranton and all of that kind of stuff, right? So basically, Kamala is having to play the same kind of game. And so that is the presumption. Strategically, it makes sense. Visually, it makes sense. Because I would love it if she would have a woman, in my dream world of this kind of slate. I think that we need 2 women to balance out the foolishness that is going on the right. Because the reality is that if she has to pick a white man, then we're still talking about an election season where the candidates are 3/4 white men, right?
Yep. Well, we're seeing a little bit of awareness, which I find fascinating, coming from some Republicans. House Speaker Mike Johnson and other national Republican leaders reportedly told their caucuses not to engage in overtly racist or gender-based attacks on Harris. What did that warning say to you?
One, the fact that the House Speaker has to tell the grown people, the elected people of the United States Congress not to be racist and sexist. I mean, my goodness, what a failure these folks are as a country. What a rolling dumpster fire the right is, that those are the kinds of admonitions that the House Speaker has to send out to his caucus. So there's that. However, there's also the thing where, do I think that Mike Johnson, who's actually from my hometown, we share a hometown in Shreveport, Louisiana, do I think that he did it because he has some overt commitment to being anti-racist and anti-sexist? Of course not. I think that he is smart and understands that the Democratic Party can run and raise money and gin up more support. The more racist and sexist the right is, all it's going to do is increase the mandate on the left to run screaming away from the future that the right is promising. And they are having to confront the fact that their policies are unpopular, and that now that Democrats and folks that are progressive minded see a path forward, that they have real problems. And so this is him trying to stem the tide of anti-Republican sentiment that is surely coming.
Well, Trump had his rally in North Carolina, and he says he's not going to be nice, to quote him. He's trying to land a new nickname for Vice President Harris. He mispronounces her name. What are your expectations for the rest of this campaign? And how do you think Harris and her campaign need to respond?
So I think that Trump is going to be on the run. I would be very surprised if he actually shows up to debate her, because he will get crushed. This is the matchup she has been waiting for. When Kamala ran in 2020, she ran on the tagline that she wanted to prosecute the case against Donald Trump. Now she has the opportunity to do that, and she has the wind at her back. And so frankly, as much as I want to see that debate, and I am thinking about which flavor of popcorn I want to have while I watch it, I think that if he has good sense, he would do better to be AWOL. So I think it's going to be a lot of bluster. I think that he's figuring out whether or not J.D. Vance was a good pick and if he can get out of that pick. And it's not like prior to, the last couple of months, the Republican Party was, their ground game is terrible. They weren't raising a lot of money. Much of the money they were raising was paying Donald Trump's legal bills. He still has court cases pending. I think he's going to be dealing with all of that. And I think that he's going to appeal to the lowest common denominator, which is to try to figure out some way to be racist and sexist and clever at the same time. And I hope he knocks himself out with that, because Donald Trump is not the first rabidly racist white man that Kamala Harris or the rest of the country has encountered in her lifetime. And now she actually has some power and a platform and supporters to be able to respond. And so I think he's going to do what he does. But I think that there's already a clear smoke signals coming from the right that they are very worried about how this strategy will work, because other than the base, it's not going to bring more people into the Republican Party. That's not what his strategy is going to be able to do.
Thank you, Dr. Brittney Cooper, for coming on What Next?
Thank you so much for having me, Mary.
Dr. Brittney Cooper is a professor of gender studies and Africana studies at Rutgers. That's the show. If you're a fan of What Next, the best way to support our work is to join Slate Plus. Go to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We're led by Alicia Montgomery, with a little help from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary C. Curtis, columnist at Roll Call and host of its Equal Time podcast. Find me on Twitter. I'm at mcurtisnc3. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.
Hey guys. guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. And now I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun. Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free and each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.